All right, welcome back. So now we're finally going to start talking about how to charge the subconscious, right? We're going to talk about the first charging technique or the first charging phase, which is the pre-charging phase or the pre-charge technique. So like I said, we pretty much went over most of the basics last video, but now we're going to talk about it a little more officially and more directly. So just go over this first point, which is pretty much review. The goal of pre-charging is to build subconscious volatility relative to some subject, right? So when we talk about the main charging phase, which is actually next video, that could be a little bit trickier to do if there's a lot of negative memory. So what you want to do, or what can be helpful to do, is kind of to loosen up your subconscious, right? Which is basically means making it more volatile, right? So when it gets more volatile, when you focus on some particular subject, your subconscious reacts more. It has an easier time entering a transcendental state and has less of an affinity for its a ground state. So when it has more of an affinity, when it has more of an affinity for an excited state, meant to say an excited state, but when it has more of an affinity for an excited state, then of course it's easier to charge your subconscious because of that affinity. Obviously, it's going to be harder to charge your subconscious if it still has such a strong tendency to stay in its ground state. So you want to loosen up your subconscious. So the pre-charging phase is very short. It's only about 10 seconds. That's not really enough time to do much charging, but it is going to help with this goal, right, of making your subconscious more volatile and loosening it up so it charges easier relative to some subject and some frequency, right? Which actually gets to the second point. So the very first step of the pre-charge technique is to pick the emotion you'd like to charge. So very simple, very obvious, but I want to, just make that very explicit too. So you want to pick the emotion, which is really saying you want to pick the frequency of the charge. Now, like I said before, we're going to talk more about I feel like I've said it 100 times, but we're going to talk more about charging for performance in chapter 13, because you can use pre-charging for that too. It doesn't make as much sense then, but you can still do it. But what we're going to talk about now really is just for emotion and not your other transcendental mental abilities. You can, like I said, you can use this really for any transcendental mental ability, but it works for the other abilities. They make more sense charging for performance rather than charging for intensity, which is what basically your goal is for emotion. You just want to make some emotion more and more and more strong or more intense, right? So like I said, the first step is to pick the frequency or the emotion of your charge. And then once you have that, the second step is to pick the subject of the charge, right? So you basically want to pick the subject that carries the charge, right? So when controlling your subconscious, you basically got to get used to thinking in these terms that we're talking about now, and more specifically, you want to get used to thinking about how the subconscious functions in the post-new phase, right? So when the subject is new, it functions in a way where it charges super easily, like I've been saying before, and that's the exception to the rule, not the actual rule. So thinking in terms of the actual rule, you want to start getting used to these rules, all these things that I'm explaining. And so when it comes to charging the subconscious, you always want to recognize what subject is carrying the charge, right? So some point of focus, something that you focus on, which your subconscious remembers, carries the charge, right? And the more charge or positive memory stored in that memory, the more you're going to feel the emotion associated with the frequency of the charge in terms of your mood when you're not focused on that subject. Then when you focus on that subject, you'll feel that emotion or the charge much more powerfully. That's when the subconscious memory switches to an active state, right? So some main subject is always going to carry the charge. Now you can make that subject, you can make it relatively complex, so it's harder to sort of focus on a singular thing. Like I said, if the subject's an environment can be many different things. The more you change the environment, the less close that subject is, or what you're focusing on is, to the main subject. So you don't always want to make it too complicated what the subject is, if it's an environment. If it's a person, right, then that's much easier. Then that one singular person carries the charge. But you always want to focus on some main subject. Like if I want to charge the feeling of being a hero, right? Normally we would get that feeling by watching a superhero movie. I could watch Superman, right? So Superman carries the charge. When I focus on him, I feel that emotion of being a hero. My subconscious switches to the hero frequency, right? And then I'll feel the emotion of heroism or being a hero much more strongly. In other words, the subconscious memory associated with Superman switches to an active state. So you always want to focus on what subject carries the charge. It's very important. And then the next step is to kind of what we said. Next step is to play out or imagine some story in your mind that favors the emotion / frequency you'd like to charge. And I meant to write it, and it revolves around the subject. So pretty much, like I said, this is kind of review. We pretty much said all these things already. Your subconscious, so your goal is to get your subconscious to charge emotion. Really charge at some frequency, but you want to feel more emotion. So you want to, like we said in I think it was chapter 3, when you charge your subconscious, all your transcendental mental abilities will start being expressed, right? So, and then we talked in chapter 8 that your subconscious mind or your subconscious instinct will start naturally expressing itself. So subconscious thought expresses action, right? So your subconscious instinct will just start expressing itself to perform all these subconscious actions related to emotion, belief, or altered perception, creativity, control. However, like we said in chapter 3, you can get it to sort of steer a little bit more into a particular subconscious action, which in this case, we're just focusing mainly on emotion. So you want to, when you tell, if you want your subconscious mind, or really your subconscious instinct or your positive mind, we've used different terms for it, but if you want your positive mind to express more emotion, more of a specific emotion, and express that emotion more and more intensely, you can't just use your conscious mind to tell it to do that any way that you would talk to someone else, giving them commands. Your subconscious doesn't like commands in that form. It doesn't listen to that, right? Your subconscious likes its commands in the form of a story, right? And you don't get to say what command determines what your subconscious is going to do, right? Your subconscious has an absolute nature, which was determined by God. So if you want your subconscious to do a specific thing, such as charge at this, or switch to this particular frequency, and then charge at that frequency to express this emotion more and more powerfully, you have to speak to it in its language. And its language, like I said, is determined by God. I may have to imagine myself, if I want, like I said, like the example we gave before. So if I want to imagine myself feeling the feeling of peace, I can't produce intention that says feel the emotion of peace. My subconscious doesn't know what that means. I have to imagine myself in a serene meadow or something, right? Or I can imagine myself at home in a relaxing environment. Whatever the case, the context is what matters. I have to do that and then imagine a very calm situation or something, and then my subconscious recognizes that as a command to feel peace. So you have to tell a story in your mind. Play out a story in your mind of some kind. Just imagine a story, and then your subconscious, that is a command to your subconscious to do a certain thing. Now, like we said before in chapter 7, each frequency has certain stories that favor that frequency. So depending on what emotion you want to charge, you need to figure out like what kind of story favors that frequency. That's what I learned too. So every emotion or every subconscious frequency has a learning curve. So you basically practice that charging at that frequency, right? There's no one rule I could tell you that allows you to charge every frequency perfectly. Like, no, you have to study each frequency and figure out which stories help you to charge that frequency. You'll even start to be accurate with it down to what I call the shade of the frequency. Because each emotion has like different shades, slight differences, right? Depending on how you tell your story. And so you're going to start to get the hang of that. You're going to notice when you tell a story or produce an intention in this way, or your story has a certain context, you might feel let's say it's inner peace, you might feel the peace emotion go this way a little bit, so it feels a little bit different. And then if you tell your story in a slightly different way, you might notice the inner peace emotion go this way, and it feels a little bit different. And it might start to branch into other frequencies and things like that. And just like as if for like a color, Or if I change the shade of a color in this direction more and more and more, now it's a new color, right? And you could do the same exact thing with subconscious frequencies. So, like inner peace, I might change more and more and more, and then it might go in more into, I don't, it's kind of hard to put it in regular words because that's more of a negative-minded way of thinking, but it might move in more into the frequency we might call tranquility. And then if I do it more, I might move more into the frequency that I might call calmness. And I can mix even other frequencies with it. I can mix joy and happiness and gratitude with the feeling of peace and things like that. But then I can also just charge in a way that gets more purely into the peace frequency. So all of that, and really that's more, we're more going to talk about that in the next video when we talk about the main charging technique. Because you're not really going to get a chance to do all of that with this technique because it's too short. But I'm kind of just going into it now. But yeah, you want to tell a story, and you want to get used to each the frequency you want to charge. Because like I said, it has a learning curve. So you want to just keep practicing telling a story and getting used to seeing how you feel. So you want to keep focusing on the emotion that you feel as you tell your story. And like I say, you gotta notice when you tell a story this way, you feel this emotion. When you tell it this way, you feel that another emotion. So you want to tell it in the way that sustains that particular emotion. And like I said, you're gonna know that you just have to keep looping the story over and over again to keep it in your subconscious right around the frequency you're looking to charge. But I kind of over-explained that. A lot of what I said will really apply to the next video when we talk about the main charging technique. But, because like I said, this pre-charge session is just too short. So you can do it in a very general way for the pre-charge session. But to go to the next point, then you'd simply tell your story for about 10 seconds, right? So that's it. And then you would wait. So after about 10 seconds, you now want to stop. Right, because the pre-charge session or window before transient memory reaches full power is roughly only about 10 seconds. Like I said, maybe a little bit shorter, could be a little tiny bit longer, but it's roughly 10 seconds. Now, after that period ends, you want to wait for about 10 minutes or longer before focusing on the subject again, and then telling a story again. The energy, just made a note here, energy from each pre-charge session sticks around for about 7 days. So, what's important here to remember is that when the pre-charge session ends, right, you don't want to, and you have to basically wait at least 10 minutes or longer, right? You don't want to focus on the subject again during that 10-minute time, because if you do, it's just going to start building the transient negative memory is going to start going back up to full power, right? It only goes back down to 0% after about 10 minutes, right? So if you focus on it again during that 10-minute interval, right? Let's say you focus on it like 3 or 4 times during a 10-minute interval, and then at the 10-minute mark, you're like, I'm ready to pre-charge again. Well, now you might only get 1 or 2 seconds before negative memory reaches, or transient negative memory reaches full power, and you're back in the subconscious entropy zone. So your goal is to try to focus on the subject which carries the charge in the subconscious entropy dead zone, right? Not a regular zone. That's what the main charging technique is for, right? You want it to be a dead zone so you can get subconscious volatility, right? So when you stop focusing on the subject at the end of one pre-charge session, you don't want to focus on it again at all. Try to avoid focusing on it for the whole time until your next pre-charge session. So just as an example, if I pre-charge, if the subject is a song, right? So let's say I want to charge my subconscious so it has a lot of emotional feeling to a song again. So it's like I'm recharging my subconscious response to it. I would focus on the song, listen to it for about 10 seconds, stop, wait 10 minutes, and then during that 10-minute time, not only do I not want to listen to that song during 10 minutes, I don't even want to think about it at all. I just want my thoughts to be focused on anything other than that song or something that reminds me of it. And then when I focus on the song again after about 10 minutes, only then do I get my full 10 seconds in that subconscious entropy dead zone, and I have 10 full seconds to pre-charge, right? So building positive memory relative to that song. And then it says energy sticks around for each pre-charge session for 7 days. So basically what I'm up to 7 days. So what I'm getting at there is you don't have to exactly on the 10-second mark, pre-charge again. It doesn't really work you don't have to do that. In fact, 10 minutes is like the minimum. So if you wait longer, let's say you wait 30 minutes, that's fine too. Like I said, the longest that I've noticed, the most ideal time for certain charges is about an hour. So you don't have to worry if you pre-charge for 10 seconds or you don't pre-charge again for, let's say you pre-charge again 11 minutes instead of 10, it's like you lost something. No, right? The energy sticks around for up to 7 days. So it's fine. Now, it's not to say it sticks around for 7 days. It just depends on how strong the initial charge was. But it's going to stick around for up to 7 days. So you can be sure at least it's going to be there for a while, right? It sticks around in your subconscious short-term memory. So you could, when I pre-charge, I don't really feel the need to pre-charge that much anymore because I'm so used to these things. And this is almost like a training thing. Now, there's some charges you have to pre-charge for. We'll talk about those later in book 2, more metaphysical stuff. But I don't know. I don't really feel the need to do this anymore. It just doesn't seem necessary. I'm trying to think. Do I ever pre-charge anymore? Do I ever use these techniques? I've done it. No, the last time I did it is when I was still studying the subconscious. I've done it. I've done it a little bit before, but I don't really do it that much. Honestly, there's so many principles I apply. I don't even think about them on a conscious level anymore. Thinking about it now, I think I have pre-charged before, but you don't have to try to pre-charge on the exactly at 10 minutes. When I pre-charge just really a few times throughout the day. That's all. Maybe if I had to count it, I'd say maybe 6 or 7 times, right? So if you pre-charge on the 10-minute mark, you would be doing this all day, right? And the goal isn't to charge using pre-charging, right? It's just to build volatility. The main charging technique is going to be used for actual charging, which that's we will talk about in the next video, and you would do that after the 10-second period. So to go over this next point, when you are pre-charging for those 10 seconds, what's going to happen is you're going to feel your emotional energy rising for the pre-charge session until it peaks. So the moment as you keep performing this technique, so you might not notice it that much initially because you haven't charged very much, but which means your subconscious memory relative to that subject hasn't become much more positive. However, as you keep performing a pre-charge session relative to that subject, telling the same story each of those 10-second pre-charge sessions, what you're eventually going to notice is during your pre-charge session, you're going to notice that for those 10 seconds, your emotion is rising, right? It's becoming more and more and more intense, right? Basically, each second of the pre-charge session is becoming more and more intense, but it's going to peak at some point, right? Generally around the 10-second mark. It's going to peak, and then you're going to notice that if you keep trying to charge or tell a story in your mind while focusing on this subject, you're going to notice that the emotion starts to drop. So it goes like this, and then it starts to go like this, right? And that's because negative memory has now reached full power, and now it's stopping, and you basically have to fight the effect of subconscious entropy, right? But during those first 10 seconds, that was a subconscious entropy dead zone. Now, like I said before, it's not precisely a dead zone because transient memory is increasing in power, but until it reaches 100%, we can approximate it as a dead zone. So the intensity of the emotion is just building and rising, right, until it reaches that 10-second mark, and then you can notice it drop. So you want to stop pre-charging right before that drop occurs, right? Because that drop, once it reaches that drop, you're basically building negative memory, and then that goes against the main objective that we talked about in the beginning of the chapter, which is to spend as much time focused on the subject in a transcendental state and as little time focused on that subject while your awareness is in the ground state. In fact, what I also forgot to mention is that because it's a subconscious entropy dead zone, positive memory keeps building for each session. So as you keep pre-charging, you're going to notice that your mind enters a transcendental state very easily during the pre-charge session phase, which is exactly what happens when something is new to you. So when you listen to a new song and you listen to it over and over, right, meaning you're charging as you listen to it, because there's negative memory isn't that effective yet, hasn't built up very much yet, you're going to notice that it's very easy for your mind to enter a transcendental state while you're listening to a song. Right, so the same thing, and that's basically because like I said, the negative memory isn't, there isn't a lot of negative memory there to stop you. So the same thing happens here. When you keep pre-charging, you're going to notice that it's becoming easier and easier for your mind to enter a transcendental state during those first 10 seconds, right? And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for that point. With each pre-charge session, like I said, you're going to notice you're feeling emotion more and more and more intensely as you keep doing that, and it rises for those first 10 seconds. So yeah, that's pretty much it for pre-charging, right? And the last thing, though, I want to mention is you might ask, how long do you pre-charge before moving on to the main charge? And then I put it's a matter of preference. So like I said, there's no rule, right, to pre-charging. This is all new, right? So I haven't trained anyone on doing this yet. I don't know what other people say or think. I still don't know if this is too complicated for people, or if this is complicated for people at all. Like I said, the people I've tried to explain some of this stuff to, it was way too they felt it was way too complicated. So I don't know. I don't know what people's opinion on any of this stuff is. And I've known it for years. I definitely didn't learn it anywhere near this order, so I don't know what it's like to learn it in this order. But in my experience, what I was really getting at, was that there's no real rule to any of this. But in my experience, I don't really feel the need to pre-charge for more than a day, right, before moving on to the main charging phase. At most 2 days when I used to do that. Well, to be honest, now I'm just way too busy. I use my subconscious for pretty much everything. But yeah, I will still pre-charge. I'm thinking about it now. There's some things I will feel the need to pre-charge for. But honestly, yeah, I mainly just use the main charging technique, I think. But anyway, yeah, you can pre-charge. I would recommend a pre-charge, especially in the beginning, for about 1 day, maybe 2 days. Right? And so, you know what I'm thinking now? Because I charge the same emotions all the time, my subconscious is very volatile. So I think that's why I don't really feel the need to pre-charge. Right? If there was a new frequency I was trying to charge up at, I might have to pre-charge. But I've been doing this so many years and charging the same emotions over and over and over that my subconscious just sustains a certain amount of volatility to the same emotion. So it's no real need to do that. Even though much of the energy is lost after 7 days, yeah, that's what I do pre-charge once in a while. Excuse me, I don't know why I'm thinking about this on camera, but I don't pre-charge that much, but yeah, I do still do it sometimes. But you don't have to do this. You can just skip to the main charging session if you want to. This helps with the main charging session, but it's not necessary. So you can main charge the second something's, no matter how old this something is. So I think I do that probably more often. But I main charge in short intervals, which is similar to this. We'll talk more about that later. But anyway, yeah, this is pretty much it. So that's the first charging technique. This is going to be very helpful if you're new to charging and it's your first time charging according to these principles. This is what I used, right? When it's not exactly when I first started charging, but when I started getting the hang of charging, I noticed that I could do this. Well, when I started to kind of understand more of the principles of charging, I noticed that I could do this to make my future charges easier. And I was like, oh, this is kind of nice. So this is kind of like, it was helpful for me, but this could be especially like training wheels if you're doing this for the first time. So yeah, in the next video, we're going to then talk about the main charging technique. So the main charging technique is how you would charge the subconscious after that 10-second interval, and when subconscious entropy or negative memory reaches full power, right? So it's going to be a lot harder to charge there than it is for this. But like I said, this is easy, and this is also helps with some of the metaphysical stuff we're going to talk about, especially connecting to God and things like that. So yeah, that's it for now, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.